Just a few short months ago, we would have never imagined a life like the one we're currently living. Businesses being forced to permanently close their doors, unemployment rates at an all-time high since the Great Depression, and living situations being turned upside down as people are rushing home to quarantine with their loved ones. Due to the complete uncertainty of these unprecedented times, the opposition opposes the resolution that this House would ban all domestic flights in the United States until the end of the COVID-19 pandemic. The opposition will accept all of the definitions proposed by the Prime Minister. The criteria today is on saving lives. While obviously saving lives is a priority, I believe that we need to also take into account the number of resulting hardships as a second criteria. Banning all air travel will have a huge impact on daily lives that I think needs to be considered. I'd like to start with a point-by-point refutation of the government's case before addressing some new off-case positions. Specifically, I'll propose a counter plan and then finish out by discussing some of the disadvantages of the government's plan. Let's start by talking about the significance. If you remember, the government stated that the US's total number of cases is now over 1 million, surpassing every other country. This is causing us to have a tough time keeping an accurate case count. While the significance of this issue can't really be argued, it's important to consider that the number of new cases isn't rapidly increasing at the same rate it was in the beginning. An article on CNN stated that in 24 states, the number of new cases reported each day is going down, showing that what we're already doing is working, it's just taking a little bit of time. Next, let's talk about the harms. The government stated that if we don't take drastic measures now, we'll likely see hundreds of thousands of deaths in the United States alone. Also, as states begin to reopen, it's doubling their number of predicted daily deaths by August. Again, what the government fails to recognize is that we've already passed the peak of this wave. According to data from Johns Hopkins University Center for System Science and Engineering, the United States is currently at 85,898 deaths. Hundreds of thousands of deaths is a gross over-exaggeration that isn't logical based on the current rates of death that we're seeing. Air travel won't push it to this number either, even as states start to reopen, as long as we continue practicing safe social distancing policies. Next, let's talk about the inherency. The government stated that with the 2-week incubation period, people are taking flights because they're so cheap without knowing that they have the virus, which is putting airline workers and other passengers at risk. While this would be a big issue if air travel was still operating the same as it was before, sharp decreases in flights being booked and airlines' new social distancing policies has made flights emptier than ever. An article on Delta Airlines' website stated that all middle seats are being blocked off and only 50 to 60% of seats on each flight can be booked. This allows people to still practice safe social distancing even on their flights. The government's plan to stop offering domestic flights completely until further notice and using government funding to provide aid to these airlines and to their workers simply isn't feasible. As stated in the beginning, the opposition opposes this due to the uncertainty of these times. In an interview with infectious disease expert Greg Poland, he brought up real-life examples like his neighbor having to travel to Massachusetts for a chemotherapy treatment, and his relative who's a nurse needing to fly to New York to help out. Banning air travel would create severe hardship for the people who still do need to travel even during this hard time. Not only that, but Delta Airlines also announced that through June, they're offering a new program in which medical volunteers can travel to hard-hitting cities for free. This is an extremely helpful program that could actually save many lives by bringing medical officials to the places that they're needed the most. The government stated that with this plan, it would reduce the rate that the pandemic is spreading, the number of deaths would lower, and the pandemic would end sooner for everyone. But these claims simply can't be backed by the current data and statistics that we have on COVID-19. The rate of spreading is already decreasing day by day, as I stated before. More people could potentially die if medical staff isn't able to get to the areas that are shorthanded and need them the most. And people like Greg Poland's neighbor won't be able to get the treatment that they need. The end of this wave is already in sight. Continuing social distancing and shelter-in-place policies will be enough to continue to see the number of cases dwindle over time. Next, let's talk about some off-case positions. I'd like to start with my counterplan. Instead of looking to the government to provide potentially billions of dollars in financial aid to allow for these airlines to completely shut down, we should look at the airlines themselves and ensure that they're taking every possible safety precaution on these flights. Since shutting down all domestic flights simply isn't feasible, airlines should be required to put policies in place to make traveling as safe as possible. Southwest Airlines already announced on their website that they'll be using hospital-grade disinfectant each night to clean the entirety of their planes, and they also equipped each plane with a hospital-grade HEPA filter to filter out any airborne particles in the plane. On top of this, the opposition would also like to require that airlines disinfect every seat in between flights, not just at the end of the day. While this might lead to less daily flights, it's a necessary precaution to take during these crazy times. On top of this, an article on USA Today announced that airlines like American, United, Delta, Southwest, Alaska, Frontier, and JetBlue have all began requiring face masks to fly. But I think we need to take this one step further and require that this policy is enforced on a federal level, stating that all airlines must refuse service to anyone that isn't wearing a mask. Lastly, while airlines are already not flying at full capacity, the opposition proposes that flights must be no more than 50% full, with all passengers seated a safe 6 feet distance away from each other. Lastly, I'd like to finish by talking about some of the disadvantages of the government's plan. First of all, even if this drastic measure did lead to a quicker end to COVID-19, the consequencing hardships it would create outweigh the benefit. We're already on the path to the end of this pandemic. We just need to be patient. Second, while illuminating air travel would cut off one major way that COVID-19 is spreading from state to state, there's no way to regulate people driving between states or taking buses. This means that banning air travel isn't going to miraculously end the issue. The amount of federal funding it would take to put the government's plan into place simply isn't worth the potential outcome, since the rate of COVID-19 spreading is already decreasing over time. That's all the time I have, but I hope that the government will address some of these points in their next speech. Thank you so much.